yesterday, the President Cyril Ramaphosa opened up the G20 Foreign Ministers Conference. Someone who was notably absent is the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Remember, he took to the website formerly known as Twitter to list his reasons for not attending this week's G20 Foreign Ministers meeting because South Africa is doing, and I quote, very, very bad things. Obviously referring to the issue around about the expropriation of private property, diversity, equity and inclusion, and climate change, says Marco Rubio. Donald Trump has openly slammed South Africa's domestic policies. Also not attending, or will be not attending, the G20 finance ministers meeting is also the U.S. Treasury Secretary. Now, Professor John Stremlau writes in the Daily Maverick that Donald Trump is attempting to use the G20 to register his personal but also official criticisms of South Africa's domestic affairs. And Professor John Stremlau joins me now on the line. Maruk, would you mind picking up my online system? Professor, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. One thing South Africa can be fairly comfortable with is that Donald Trump has not been making friends across the board, whether it is South Africa, whether it is calling Vladimir Zelensky a dictator, or whether it is criticizing the EU at last week's Munich Security Conference, where he sent his vice president, J.D. Vance, to essentially obliterate the whole principle of NATO and the EU. So South Africa is not alone when Donald Trump hasn't been making friends and creating enemies all around the world.
Well, Lester, you've got that right, certainly, and it's amazing to me how many friends and allies of the United States are really angry at Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is being Donald Trump.
What is Donald Trump's endgame here? Antagonizing close allies. South Africa is an important partner, particularly in our trade. But what is Donald Trump's endgame here? Let's start with the South African context. What is he trying to achieve with its antagonism of the South African state and our domestic affairs here?
I can't explain Donald Trump. As some wag said in the U.S., you connect the dots to get a doctrine. But in Trump's case, it's just the dots, and you can't connect them, except that there are some themes that run through Donald's life and have been expanded in a book by Mary Trump, his niece, on how my family created the most dangerous man in the world. And it is one of the perplexing things about Donald Trump is that he was elected fairly in November. I was an observer in Georgia for the Carter Center, and it was a straight win, but a narrow win. And the Americans are very divided right now. And maybe Donald Trump will galvanize Americans, but that's an American problem. For the rest of the world, it's trying to adapt to Donald Trump. And what I tried to say in that Maverick piece was, let America be right now. You can't come to terms with Trump, but you can isolate him and work around him and wait for the Americans to wake up to the realities of the world and its interdependence and its sustainable development. And I must say that Cyril Ramaphosa, while giving a general speech, was very precise in his support of sustainable development and of climate change, and it just simply ignored Donald Trump's rantings.
And so can the world organize without a US and a Donald Trump when it comes to multilateral organizations, when it comes to its participation in the World Health Organization. It's Donald Trump clearly trying to disempower NATO. Even been some conversations around not Donald Trump, but those definitely of his ilk, of whether the US even participates in the UN. So can the world organize without a US? And you saying that there needs to be some sort of collective reaction from other G20 members on what would be the future of multilateral cooperation.
Well, Lester, you're raising a critical point, and I don't want to get too academic here, but the world is still a world of sovereign states, and what takes place within those sovereign states are the business of the governments of the day in those states, and so there are limits to what you can say about interference, but at the same time, you want to get those states, and as Cyril Ramaphosa was elaborating at yesterday's G20, to collaborate. And I'm worried that that the go-it-alone attitude of the United States may well be replicated by other states that are multipolar and flexing their muscles and will dam the torpedoes and go ahead and just operate in their own narrow interests. And that's what Cyril Ramaphosa is trying to counteract. And I think that's what the UN was originally intended to do. And it needs to be reformed. We all know that. But it's at the moment a very, very tricky situation for the rest of the world to work together and maybe Donald Trump provides the catalyst for cooperation, yeah. Lester. The ironies of history are many and widespread. So
that's why, John, I'm not. Of course, I'm worried about what the immediate impact of the US dropping South Africa from a go. It would have real world consequences, but doesn't necessarily mean that there is an all right trade ban. It just means that South Africa then does not get preferential access to the US market. I don't think the US would be so dumb to ban trade with South Africa altogether, because they need a lot of the products that we dig up from our soil and manufacture and send there. That's why I'm not too worried, because it's not just South Africa that is feeling the consequence of what has it been 6 weeks of a Donald Trump presidency.
No, that's right, and you shouldn't be despairing, but at the same time, you've got to think creatively, and fortunately, South Africa is once still secure in its constitution and its identity as a post-apartheid democracy. And that seems to be holding, even though we know about inequality and poverty and joblessness at unacceptable rates, and don't know quite how to grow ourselves out of it. But that's struggling as nevertheless, South Africa has a lot of goodwill and a lot of good relations with very diverse countries, with China, for example. China's an autocracy, but South Africa is a democracy, but they managed to work together. And I think that the South Africans can creatively both leverage American concessions, but also work with others too. And the West Europeans now are angry at Donald Trump. So you work with whom you can work with, and isolate. Donald Trump is a particular leader at a particular time, and I never thought I'd see a second term, but nevertheless we have it now, and the Americans have got to come to terms with it. They are in a constitutional crisis right now, and so let's stand back and work with those that can work with us.
South Africa does have support, and I want your thoughts on what was a series of tweets and statements from various European ambassadors. The South African-based missions sending out a series of tweets supporting South Africa, paying credit to South Africa's constitutional democracy. A tacit but a clear show of confidence of European governments to South Africa after the threats of Donald Trump last week. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me of the need to work around Donald Trump, and don't forget that he did not sign up to this troika that is very, the accidents of history. The fact that South Africa is the host of the G20 for the first time in Africa is a reminder to the world of the need for transcending the North-South divide, as Cyril Ramaphosa is arguing. And that might focus their attention on the fact that Donald Trump is unqualified to lead the G20 in 2026. And this is theoretically possible to replace him, but I don't see how the political will is there among the member states. But I think that the foreign ministers have got to struggle with this issue, and it's on the agenda, I'm sure. But what are the options for moving forward with the G20, which is a reminder of both the sovereign equality of states, but also their need to work together. And so, South Africa is exquisitely positioned. If it wasn't being undermined or challenged by Elon Musk and the PayPal mafia back in the U.S., I mean, the ironies of history right here, Lester, are just breathtaking.
Professor John Stremlau, really appreciate your time as always.